we didn't just lose Bray Wyatt this week. If you tuned into SmackDown, you saw they did a tremendous job paying tribute to both Bray Wyatt and Terry Funk. I love Terry Funk. And one of the things that I love about Terry Funk is that every wrestling fan has different reasons as to why they love him. This is a guy who had at least 2, if not 3, Hall of Fame careers, all wrapped into one. We lost him at 79 years old. He was in a battle with Alzheimer's, which is just the worst. But, Terry Funk started wrestling in 1965, I believe. So that means he wrestled in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. And I want to say he got in, because I think he got in a little bit during the 2010s. So this was a guy who was involved in wrestling throughout 6 different decades. And what I love about Terry Funk is, as he was wrestling through 6 different decades, he didn't act like my way is the way to do things. He didn't act like, oh, kids today. He didn't act like, you guys are lucky that I'm here, I'm moving on to the next thing. He was in movies. He was in Roadhouse. But it was always a love for the business. That's all you ever got. Watching Terry Funk wrestle, seeing him in interviews, watching him on Beyond the Mat, it was just, this is a guy who loves the wrestling business. And people have different phases of Terry Funk love. I feel like, people love the old school Funk. The Dusty Sucks Eggs Terry Funk. And it's interesting too also because throughout all these decades, and fans evolving and fans changing through the decades, at no point did Terry Funk become this guy that wasn't believable. You always believed everything Terry Funk was doing. He was that unique of a performer. He had his run in the NWA. He was one of the quintessential Dusty Rhodes opponents, obviously. A great foil to Dusty Rhodes, but then also an incredible foil to Ric Flair. Going into the late 80s, and I believe the very early 90s maybe, became a great foil to Ric Flair, right? And Ric Flair as this, even when Ric Flair wasn't really being a true heel, he was still, wheeling, dealing, kiss stealing, jet plane riding, Rolex wearing. And Terry Funk was just this dirty, grimy country boy from the Double Cross Ranch, ready to beat that ass. And so Ric Flair and Terry Funk became perfect counterparts to each other. He had a run in WWF at the time, 1985, 1986. Had some classics with Junkyard Dog, but I think is really remembered. WrestleMania 2, he had a match. But I think he's really remembered in that time period for a couple of the matches that he had with Hulk Hogan. He became a foe that was set up for Hulk Hogan to defend the championship against, which that was a big thing. Hogan was at every show. That was the draw. Hogan was the megastar of WWE, but you've got to have credible opponents and a steady diet of them. And Terry Funk became that credible opponent in the mid-'80s there. I think there was even one of the very early Saturday Night's main events, I want to say, was headlined by Terry Funk and Hulk Hogan. He was also during that time period, 70s, 80s, over in All Japan, becoming a legend in All Japan. And these are all separate, right? Because you don't have tape trading as heavy, at least in the 80s. That starts to pick up in I guess you had it, but not like it was in the 90s. And even tape trading, there were people that were just not in tune with it. And you really didn't have it in the 80s. VHS technology didn't really catch until the late 80s going into the 90s. But he is a legend in All Japan. One of the many times he retired, the many retirements. The infamous forever speech, forever. Go on YouTube and watch it. It's amazing. But then I think the sort of next wave of Terry Funk starts in the early to mid 90s, right? Because that run was kind of over. The Terry Funk that started in the 60s, that really catches on in the late 70s and in the 80s, that kind of dissipates, right? As any run does. And Terry Funk redefines himself. And that's when the sort of, Terry Funk was always this hardcore guy, but that's when just the crazy old man hardcore icon, Terry Funk, shows up. And one of the early notable times that we see that, and it was probably going back, because I guess I'm sure I watched Terry Funk when I was younger, but this is probably when I started to like put him in that idol category, was his performance in the 1995 Kawasaki Dream King of the Deathmatch tournament for IWA Japan, this fledgling company. They ended up getting a bunch of people into Kawasaki Stadium for this deathmatch tournament. And this was huge, you know, not only for Terry Funk and redefining his career, but this was really what put Cactus Jack on the map as this maniac guy. This was Cactus Jack who was gone from WCW, trying to figure out where he landed, you know, a guy that was looked at the time as not somebody that would ever be, it just wasn't the WWE type. And Terry Funk and Cactus Jack go through this IWA King of the Deathmatch tournament, and they end up in the finals together in a no ropes, exploding ring, barbed wire match, where Cactus Jack ends up winning, and charred flesh and everything. But that kind of leads in to Terry Funk's ECW run, where he has a lot of classic matches over there. But probably the biggest moment is when ECW gets their first pay-per-view, which was just the victory of all victories, just an accomplishment like you wouldn't believe. For an independent from Philadelphia to hit the mainstream like that in 1997 and put on Barely Legal in April, it was unbelievable. Headlined by a triple threat match between Big Stevie Cool, the Sandman, and Terry Funk, with the winner getting to face Raven for the ECW championship immediately. And Terry Funk won that hardcore triple threat and beat Raven for the ECW champion, becoming the man. There's that, and then there's also the Born to Be Wired barbed wire match with Sabu, which is the most brutal barbed wire match I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of them. But a classic, and one that was certainly saved for ECW home video. Moments of it were shown on the ECW TV show, but never on pay-per-view. If you wanted the full thing, home video was the way to go. But he ended up losing the title to Sabu in that match, which I don't think was planned. It was just they were so tangled up in barbed wire, they had to do that. Not long after that, towards the end of 1997, September of 1997, Terry Funk retires again. He's done. Puts on Terry Funk's WrestleFest. This is a huge deal and shows you how respected at that point, after 30 years, Terry Funk was, because representatives from every company were at that show, and that wasn't something that was happening. You had WCW people, you had WWF people, you had ECW people, all at this independent show that just Terry and his people were putting on to honor Terry Funk, with the main event being Bret the Hitman Hart versus Terry Funk. Again, not something that was happening at all during that period of time. And of course, Bret Hart would get the victory because Terry Funk, if he's retiring, is going to go out on his back. He thanked everybody. That was September of 1997. And then in December of the same year, Chainsaw Charlie debuted on WWE television. So what, 3 months after his retirement, he puts some pantyhose on and he debuts on WWE television, chainsawing himself out of a box as Cactus Jack's new tag team partner. Now, a lot of people were thinking, this is just like Vince McMahon, not thinking that you could just have Terry Funk on TV, thinking that you have to dress him up as Chainsaw Charlie, like he's got to have some ridiculous gimmick, when as it turns out, this was Terry Funk's idea. They called him asking if he wanted to come in, and he said he would come in, but he really wanted to be Chainsaw Charlie. So Chainsaw Charlie and Cactus Jack have their run. Height of the Attitude Era, by the way. They go to WrestleMania 14, the same WrestleMania where Stone Cold wins the WWE Championship, and they have their classic dumpster match with the New Age Outlaws. And Terry Funk sticks around. Eventually, they drop the Chainsaw Charlie thing altogether, and he's just Terry Funk, and he's in WWE. Before that, and before he retires, I want to say it's 97 Royal Rumble. There's a Shotgun Saturday Night before the Royal Rumble. Right, because they were in Texas for the 97 Royal Rumble. Yes. And the Shotgun Saturday Night in January of 97 before that Royal Rumble, Terry Funk is there. It's just like a one-off appearance. But he starts like cutting a promo on Steve Austin, who's on commentary, and they get into it. It's great. Look it up on YouTube. It's fantastic. After his WWE run, he'd have a little short run again in ECW. He had a bit of a run in WCW in the 2000s. He was part of their hardcore division. But yeah, talk about wrestling being a roller coaster with the dips. This would be a dip. I think that, everything was a dip in WCW in 2000, but he probably made good money. After WCW went away, Terry Funk would, he'd go on the indies for a while. He'd retire again. He'd come back, do one-shots, show up, do stuff for Ring of Honor. He showed up and did the ECW One Night Stand pay-per-view. And then, and he would keep showing up at indie shows for quite a while, up until in the 2010s. He was still doing indie shows and stuff, but a few years back, and then, he was still doing signings and everything. I got to meet him a couple times. It was awesome. And a few years back, he kind of disappeared from the public eye. And friends of his in wrestling, be it Tommy Dreamer, Mick Foley, would talk about how he was going through Alzheimer's, and it was what it was, and prayers up for Terry Funk, and he lasted as long as he could. But we could go on and on. Terry Funk is an extremely influential person, and he influenced multiple generations in multiple different ways. It was great to see him get honored on WWE television. Great to see Cody say a couple of things about him, and great that his relevance to the current generation of wrestling was brought forward. I think that's important, and I would probably guess that if Terry Funk were actually involved in the hardcore tag team match that happened on SmackDown, it might be a little more hardcore, but it's Fox after all. And I'm glad that he was honored at all. So rest in peace to an absolute legend in Terry Funk. Just one of a kind. And